They started building a multi-million-dollar villa just past my fence, and no warning, no heads up. Concrete poured, steel frames rising, HOA banners fluttering like it was some kind of celebration. Not a single soul asked my opinion. Not one person even glanced my way. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, until the president strolled over with a clipboard and called it progress. From my porch, I watched walls replace the open space where deer used to pass through. Everyone seemed thrilled except me. I kept my mouth shut. Back then, anyway. Ever witness someone put up something on land that's not theirs? Yeah, me too. Let me tell you how it went down. Feel free to drop your own stories in the comments. The day I realized they were constructing a luxury villa on land I believed was part of mine, I was feeding a stubborn calf, named Clay Parker. Never thought I'd find myself tangled up in a fight with the HOA president. I'm just a 35-year-old rancher, set in my ways, sticking to flannel and looking after my livestock. Usually, the biggest drama around here is when one of my cows sneaks into someone's flower bed. But everything shifted the day I met Cheryl Langford. Looking back, I should have known trouble was coming the moment we spoke. She carried this air about here like she always got her way. Turns out, she'd probably been eyeing that empty lot beside my property long before I even considered its potential. One spring morning, I strolled over to check it out. The fog was clearing, and dew still coated the wild grass that had grown unchecked all winter. I'd been thinking that land would be perfect for expanding my grazing area. My cattle operation wasn't massive by Texas standards, but it was growing and I needed space to rotate herds. The grass was already thriving out there, looked like a natural extension of what I had. At the time, I didn't even know who the legal owner was. Should have done my homework first, I know, but I figured there's no harm in asking. Near the property line stood a blonde woman in an expensive-looking suit, talking on the phone about development plans and neighborhood aesthetics. She looked completely out of place, heels sinking into soft dirt, talking like she owned the whole county. I caught bits of her conversation as something about boosting property values and changing the demographic. When she finally ended the call, I approached with what I thought was a friendly nod. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said. "Clay Parker. I run the ranch next door. Any chance you know who owns this lot? I've been thinking about buying it if it's on the market." She turned, gave me the kind of look that sizes you up from boots to ball cap, and let out a laugh. Not the nice kind, either. More like the kind that makes your stomach turn. "That land already has an owner, Mr. Parker," she said, flipping her flawless hair. "With my 15 years in real estate, I'd suggest you stick to your livestock." The way she said livestock made it sound like I was some hobby farmer with goats in the backyard, not a working rancher. I could feel the heat in my face, but I kept calm. Arguing wasn't going to get me anywhere, not with someone like her. "Well, that's a shame." "Congratulations then," I replied, keeping my tone steady. But inside, I was already wondering who she thought she was and how she could be so sure of herself without even introducing herself properly. As I turned to walk away, she called out, "I'm Cheryl Langford, by the way, HOA president. I'll be building a home here, something that better reflects our community's standards." I paused and gave her a polite nod, but my mind was spinning. What was wrong with the way I lived? My place was clean, my fences stood straight, and the land was cared for. Maybe it didn't look like a page out of a luxury home magazine, but this was ranch country and not uptown Dallas. Her words lingered longer than I cared to admit. That night, sitting on my porch with a beer, looking out at the open lot, I started thinking harder. Cheryl carried herself like someone who always got what she wanted and expected no resistance. My Uncle Ray used to say, "Land outlives the people who walk on it, as long as you treat it right." He once buried his Navy watch under the old oak and marked the spot with pencil on a folded map. I still had that map, aged and yellowed, untouched for years. I'd crossed paths with difficult folks before, but rarely had someone dismissed me without even learning my name. That did something to me. That night, I made up my mind I wasn't going to take Cheryl's word for it. I'd start digging into who really owned that piece of land. 15 years in real estate might sound impressive, sure, but I've learned the hard way some of the most confident folks are the first to overlook something important. The next morning, I told Mrs. Johnson, my neighbor, about Cheryl's plans. In towns like ours, word spreads fast. Within days, just about everyone knew Cheryl was planning to build something big. She even arranged a community meeting where she shared her vision of raising home values and creating a refined neighborhood vibe. I sat in the back, listening as she described her dream home via imported finishes, luxury details, the whole 9 yards. It sounded more like a vacation home for the rich than a house that belonged out here. I probably should have spoken up then, but something told me to stay quiet for now and see how far she'd try to take it. Call it gut instinct or plain hard-headedness, but something told me Cheryl's certainty would be the very thing that tripped her up. The way she rattled off boundaries and zoning as if they were gospel made me wonder whether she'd actually verified anything, or was just trusting that her 15 years in real estate would bulldoze any doubt. So I didn't stop her. I let the machines hum and the crews hammer, because when the last nail went in, I intended to have the deed to every inch they touched. After her big pitch about the mansion to be, sleep wouldn't come. That itch in the back of my mind, the one that says you've missed something crucial, just kept digging. I finally headed up to the attic, a place I'd mostly ignored since inheriting the ranch from my uncle. He was the meticulous type, the kind who kept every slip of paper, ledgers, receipts, insurance forms, survey notes, row after row of neatly labeled boxes. I hauled down stacks, coughing through the dust, flipping past tax files and equipment receipts older than me, faded photos of the ranch from decades back. Then I cracked open a dented tin box that looked like it had survived a tornado. Inside was a hand-drawn survey from 1980. Boundaries inked in red and signed by a county surveyor whose name didn't ring a bell. The paper was heavy and yellowed, but the lines were clean as a knife edge. On a hunch I set it beside the current county map I kept in the kitchen. Under the bright light, I ran the measurements again and again before it sank in. My line ran 50 meters farther east than today's record showed. 50 meters doesn't sound like much until you pace it out by the old fence posts and realize a good slice of Cheryl's project sits squarely on your side. Out in the field, the world suddenly looked different. With a camera around my neck and a GPS clipped to my shirt, I marked every bad stake like I was charting a battlefield. The more I looked, the more history surfaced. Old metal pins buried in weeds, the real corners half swallowed by time. Somewhere along the way, likely when the county modernized its books, my true boundary got misplaced. I'll admit, my first urge was to stomp up to Cheryl's door, slam the map on her porch, and tell her to quit while she was behind. But I held back. Maybe it was remembering the way she dismissed me without a second thought. Maybe it was a quieter voice telling me to be smart, not loud. One of the crew glanced up and called, "Checking lines again, cowboy." I gave him a nod and kept moving. He didn't try small talk after that. Back at the table, staring at both maps, the plan started to sharpen. A head-on fight right then would just be my old paper versus her polished files, her lawyers, her connections. She could bury me in procedure, but if I kept my head down, documented everything, and let her pour money and pride into building on ground that wasn't hers, the picture would be a whole lot clearer when I finally spoke up. So I made copies of every document, stacked them in labeled folders, and set about recording the entire build. I bought a camera with real reach, kept a detailed log, and spent hours at the courthouse learning the parts of property law folks only care about when it's almost too late. Maybe it was patient, maybe it was cruel, probably both, but I wasn't guessing anymore. I was verifying. And I knew I needed a witness. Not long after that, things began to move. Within 2 weeks of that neighborhood gathering, the construction teams began arriving, and these weren't your run-of-the-mill local guys in dusty pickups. These crews showed up in matching gear, hauling high-end equipment, and working with the kind of precision that screams one thing: a deep pockets. I stood at my kitchen window, watching them wheel in a mobile office trailer and start surveying the land, my land. Though they had no idea. The irony? I had the best seat in town. Nobody else had a clearer view of what was unfolding. Over the next several days, 3 different survey crews came through, hammering stakes into the dirt and measuring everything like it was gospel. I wondered if they'd ever seen the original maps from Uncle Bill's Attica, or if they were simply relying on the flawed county records that had been wrong for decades. That's when things started to get interesting and when Cheryl's real nature began to show. When the county inspector came by to check permits, I happened to be collecting my mail. Cheryl, ever poised and professional, told him the structure was a community storage warehouse. I nearly bit through my tongue to keep from laughing. A warehouse. I could see the plans spread across the folding table from my side of the fence. A multi-level layout, huge windows, what looked suspiciously like pool schematics. Nothing about those blueprints hinted at commercial use, but labeling it a warehouse helped her sidestep certain building codes and cut down on permit costs. Shady? Definitely. Clever? Also yes. The build moved faster than I expected, and it didn't take long to figure out why. Within weeks, the foundation was poured, framing was underway, and it became clear Cheryl was racing against some invisible clock, trying to get ahead of scrutiny before anyone could start asking uncomfortable questions. I made it part of my daily routine to stroll by the site around lunchtime, just when the workers were breaking. I played it casually, just another nosy neighbor. Big warehouse, I'd say, grinning. Most of them would smirk or shake their heads knowingly. One guy, Mike, who seemed to be running the site, leaned over one day and muttered, "Between us, I've never seen a warehouse with a master suite and a 3-car garage." I laughed. Guess storage needs have gotten fancy. On another walk by, I casually asked Mike what kind of budget they were working with. His answer hit me like a punch to the ribs. "She's putting nearly $6 million into this place," he said, wiping sweat from his face. "Italian marble, hardwood flown in from overseas, even a climate-controlled wine cellar. Whatever's getting stored in here must be priceless." $6 million. That evening, I sat on my porch, staring out at the rising frame of Cheryl's warehouse, trying to absorb that number. A $6 million mansion on land that legally belonged to me. And she had no clue. Every dollar she poured into the property, every upgrade, every fixture, every luxury detail, it all made my case stronger. As time passed, the pretense of the warehouse vanished. Big glass windows went in, exposing high-ceilinged rooms that were unmistakably designed for living, not storage. Pool excavation started, complete with a spa and what looked like a bar set up nearby. Neighbors began murmuring. Some were impressed. Others, not so much, jealous maybe, or annoyed their own homes now looked plain by comparison. Even Mrs. Johnson swung by one evening to vent about the noise, though she had to admit the place would be stunning once finished. Everyone knew what it really was, a luxury house. Everyone except the officials who approved it. I kept documenting every single step. I had a log full of dates, times, photos, and measurements. I took shots of every delivery truck, noted each contractor, and tracked the build from frame to finish. And more importantly, I recorded exactly how much of it was being built on my property. This wasn't a minor overlap. It was a significant chunk, about a third of the entire structure. One evening after the crews packed up, I paced it out myself, using those old metal survey stakes still barely visible in the tall grass. I confirmed it. They had laid foundation deep into my land. Still, I said nothing. Cheryl would occasionally roll by in her high-end SUV, stepping out to point and gesture, giving orders or checking progress. She never once looked in my direction, which suited me just fine. During one of her visits, she walked the boundary line and spray-painted a bright orange arc that swept across my south gate. "That your new line now?" I asked. "Could be, unless you've got a problem with it," she replied, voice dripping with smugness, HOA folder in hand like it was a badge of honor. I kept my face neutral and my mouth shut. The less I engaged, the better. By the end of the third month, her warehouse had transformed into the most extravagant home in the area, something you'd expect in an upscale subdivision, not out here among fields and cattle. And I'll admit, the craftsmanship was stunning. Stonework that looked hand-cut, proportions that were graceful. Even the landscaping was breathtaking. It was going to be an incredible home, a $6 million showpiece, built with her money, on my dirt. As the place neared completion, one question kept echoing in the back of my mind. What happens when she finds out? She believed I was just another quiet trencher who'd stay out of her way, but I wasn't just watching, I was preparing. The real turning point came on a sunlit morning when I spotted Cheryl's SUV pulling in again, followed closely by a construction truck. I was sitting on the porch with my coffee, enjoying the cool before the Texas heat settled in, and the moment I saw her get out, dressed in another one of her high-end suits, this one a cream color so spotless it practically glowed, I knew this visit would be different. She had that familiar look on her fascia, the one that meant she was about to ask for something and expected to get it. In her arms was a neatly organized folder, and trailing behind her was Mike, the site foreman. They spent several minutes at the edge of the property, pointing at blueprints and gesturing toward my fence. I didn't need to hear the words to guess what they were discussing. Then they both started walking toward my place. I finished the last sip of my coffee, set the mug down, and went out to meet Thema right at the line Cheryl believed divided our properties. "Good morning, Mr. Parker," she said, voice syrupy sweet in that way people use when they want a favor. "We've run into a small snag that I'm sure you'll be more than happy to help us resolve." Mike stood behind her, visibly uncomfortable. You could tell he wasn't thrilled about asking me for anything, especially not something that hadn't been cleared beforehand. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Langford?" I asked, even though I had a pretty good idea already. She flipped open her folder and pulled out a site plan with measurements and diagrams. "We're at the stage where we need to bring in larger equipment, cranes for the roof, specialized trucks for the finishing work. Problem is, we're a little tight on clearance. About 10 feet short, actually." She motioned to the temporary fence I'd installed precisely along the original, legally accurate boundary marked on that decades-old survey map. "Would it be possible to move your fence back just a bit, just until the work is done? Of course, we'll restore everything afterward." I walked over and ran my hand along the fence post, pretending to consider it like I hadn't thought about its position 100 times already. Truth is, I'd been waiting for this request. I'd placed that fence in exactly the spot that would make final construction as difficult as possibly right on the line. Moving it back, that would give her more room, a broken bar, and also allow her to encroach even further onto land that wasn't hers. "You know what, Mrs. Langford," I said after a pause, "that sounds reasonable. We're all neighbors here, right?" The way her face lit up, you'd have thought I'd handed her a winning lottery ticket. "Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Parker. This is the kind of community spirit that makes this neighborhood what it is." Community spirit, right. I even pitched in and helped Mike and his crew move the fence back a 15 extra feet of open space for their trucks and equipment. Cheryl hovered nearby, directing like a maestro, suggesting where to plant new temporary markers and treating the whole thing as if she were granting me the privilege of helping her. Was I being too accommodating? Maybe. Or maybe it was exactly the trap I needed her to walk right into. In the following weeks, construction spilled over into that newly cleared space, and just as I expected, the pool deck stretched farther than before, sprawling well into my rightful property. The driveway extended with polished stonework that probably cost more than my entire yearly income. They planted trees, added lush gardens, and even built a little gazebo, each element landing deeper into land that didn't belong to her. Every luxury addition, every detail, became another layer of value she was unknowingly pouring into my soil, and I documented all of it. Photos, video, measurements, time-stamped records. I didn't leave a single detail to chance. What stunned me most wasn't how far the project went, it was how comfortable she became treating my land as her own. No more requests, no more pretense, just action. Workers stored materials over the line. Equipment was parked overnight in my pasture. She carried on like she owned the whole horizon, and I let her. Each day, her investment deepened, and so did my legal leverage. Then came a letter, hand-delivered by a teenager who clearly had better places to be. The envelope had a hose crest on it, and I pinned it to the fridge beside Uncle Ray's Navy discharge papers. One stood for duty, the other, pure fiction. The notice was wrapped in formal language about property standards and maintenance violations. The message underneath: I was being cited for non-compliant fencing and unauthorized agricultural structures, a fine, on my land, while she built a mansion on it. I had 30 days to correct the issues or face mounting penalties and potential legal action. Cheryl showed up 3 days later to follow up. "You can take care of it the easy way," she said with a polished smile, "or we can drown you in paperwork." There was a document in her folder that listed my parcel as pending reassignment, but it lacked a signature or official seal. That wasn't just overreach. That was forgery. It should have made me furious. But mostly, I just felt resolved. Still, the internal tug-of-war was real. There were nights I lay awake asking myself if I was dragging this out too long. Was I being strategic or just vindictive? Should I have spoken up earlier? Saved her from herself? But every time I considered it, I heard that first laugh in my head, the one she gave when she sized me up like a joke. I remembered how little effort she made to understand who I was, what I did, or why this land mattered to me. She judged me by my boots and flannel, and now, by the looks of things, she was judging boundaries with the same casual arrogance. And she was about to find out exactly how costly those assumptions could be. Maybe Cheryl needed this experience more than she realized, but as the mansion neared the final stages, one question kept nagging at me: had I let it go too far? By then, my file of infractions and documented violations was thick enough to serve as a doorstop. I was ready. All I had to do was wait for Cheryl to put the last nail in. The house, to be fair, was a masterpiece. Natural stone cladding wrapped the exterior, and enormous glass windows caught the morning sun in a way that made the whole structure glow like something out of an upscale catalog. The landscaping was just as impressive via imported greenery, a high-end irrigation system, even a lawn that looked too pristine to walk on. She'd hired a landscape architect from Dallas, and it showed. Everything was placed with care: mature trees delivered on flatbeds, flower beds arranged with mathematical precision, and a gazebo nestled right where I knew my property line ran. The pool? It had lights under the surface, a waterfall feature, and a quiet trickle that I could hear even from my porch. If I didn't know better, I might have been genuinely impressed. But the more complete her vision became, the more entitled she acted. Cheryl started hosting what she called preview tours for her inner circle of friends from the city, home members, people she wanted to impress. I didn't bother watching directly anymore. I just listened. The engines of expensive cars rolling up had become the drums of an ongoing battle. From behind the curtains, I could see them stroll through the grounds, Cheryl leading the way, talking with pride about features built entirely on my land. She loved gesturing toward the pool and patio like a showpiece, bragging about turning a rural patch into a slice of modern elegance. It was like watching someone break into your house and then invite guests over for a dinner party. One afternoon, while I was pulling weeds in the garden, she noticed me and strolled over to the boundary line. "Clay," she called out cheerfully, "you'll have the perfect view of the pool from your house. Isn't that great?" I just nodded. "Quite the view," I said, already picturing the court's reaction once everything came to light. The absurdity of it all was almost laughably she was showing off improvements she'd made to my land. Later, I saw camera flashes from what looked like a professional photographer. Champagne glasses clinked, and laughter echoed across the property. Someone raised a glass in celebration. I wondered if they realized they were toasting inside what was technically my backyard. But the neighbors weren't helping. Their comments started piling up, subtle at first, but biting nonetheless. Mrs. Johnson dropped by one evening with a casual jab masked as a compliment. "Cheryl really went all out with that place," she said, sipping iced tea on my porch. "Must feel odd living next to something so extravagant. Ever think about doing a few upgrades?" I smiled, kept it polite, but inside I was counting the days until I could prove them all wrong. Then there was Bob from the HOA board. He hinted I might want to make some enhancements of my own to keep up with the evolving standards Cheryl had supposedly established. "Property values are climbing," he said. "You'd be smart to ride the wave." I nodded, but every comment like that chipped away at my patience. Folks were beginning to look at me as if I were dragging down the neighborhood as some relic of a simpler time that didn't fit in anymore. My mother once told me, "When someone takes from you, don't shout. Take notes. And then take everything." Some nights I'd sit on my porch, looking at that dazzling estate glowing like a resort and wonder, oh, was I waiting too long? What if my old documents were flawed? What if Cheryl had done her homework after all? That doubt ate at me. But I'd already gone too far to back out now. Every day that passed made the fallout bigger and riskier. Behind the scenes, I'd been working with a property attorney named David Walsh. A friend from church had recommended him, said he was the best around for land disputes. I brought everything: the original boundary sketches, photos of construction, measurements I'd logged, even videos showing where her build extended into my parcel. David didn't mince words. "You've got a solid case," he said. "The question isn't whether you'll win, it's what happens after you do." He was right. If the court sided with me, what would happen to Cheryl's $6 million dream home? There were only a few outcomes. I could take possession of the structure, she could be ordered to pay for the land, or she might even be forced to dismantle the parts that crossed the line, if that was even feasible. And that's when I had to ask myself, what would I do if I ended up owning it? Truth was, I couldn't afford it. Not the taxes, not the upkeep, not the utilities. That place was a palace, beautiful, yes, but completely impractical for someone like me. I didn't need luxury. I needed justice. David walked me through the legal options. Cheryl could be required to buy the land she encroached on, pay rent for its use, or face court-ordered changes to the structure. The most important thing, he said, was that we had leverage now and it was time to use it wisely. The priority was clear: establish my legal ownership before dealing with anything else. Meanwhile, Cheryl continued charging ahead, making final arrangements for what she proudly referred to as her grand unveiling. She'd commissioned a custom gate sign, brought in a high-end catering company from Austin, and sent out what looked like invitations to half the county. One of those invitations ended up in my mailbox, probably an oversight, considering we hadn't exchanged more than a few words since she'd shifted that fence. Still, holding that elegant card with its scripted date and location made one thing obvious: the moment of truth was almost here. Cheryl was about to find out the land beneath her pride and joy wasn't entirely hers. I'd already filed for injunctive relief. While she decorated with flowers and light fixtures, I was preparing to reclaim what was mine. The celebration she planned was anything but modest. Tables were dressed in crisp white linens, caterers bustled about arranging floral centerpieces that looked like they belonged at a five-star wedding, and a jazz group began setting up by the pool. Workers threaded lights through the trees and shrubs, casting a soft glow over the property and transforming it into something out of a dream. I sat on my porch with a beer in hand, watching the whole production unfold. The irony was thick as so much time, energy, and money being poured into a party for a house that wasn't fully on her land. This wasn't just a celebration, it was Cheryl's victory lap. She was basking in what she believed to be her crowning achievement. As the evening set in, expensive vehicles began pulling up, and people in designer clothes strolled up the driveway. I recognized a few neighbors, but the rest were clearly Cheryl's city contacts or real estate elites, business partners, and folks who looked like they never had to check price tags. There were even a few familiar faces from TV segments and social columns of people who lived for attention and exclusivity. The whole atmosphere was polished, upscale, and completely at odds with our little rural community. Still, I had to give it to her. She'd built something remarkable, and now she was showing it off to exactly the crowd she wanted to impress. Not long into the event, I heard her voice carrying across the property. She was giving a speech. Though the words were faint from where I sat, I caught a few gems of phrases like a vision fulfilled and a legacy for our community. The crowd applauded warmly as a photographer captured Cheryl in front of her mansion, holding a champagne flute and beaming in the golden glow of sunset. This was her Becca, surrounded by admirers, confident in her success, and completely unaware of what was about to unfold. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then the car arrived. A sleek black sedan rolled up to the main gate, and despite knowing exactly what was coming, I felt a surge of nerves. I had orchestrated every step of this, but still, watching it play out made my pulse race. Two men stepped out of sharp suits, clean cut, carrying a manila envelope and a clipboard. The kind of presence that instantly changes the energy of a room, even an outdoor one. David Walsh had arranged everything to the letter. These were professional process servers, and they were here to deliver the news Cheryl never saw coming. The jazz band kept playing, but I noticed a few guests glancing toward the entrance, curious. The men made a beeline for Cheryl, who stood near the pool, still basking in compliments. From my shadowed porch, I watched one of them speak to her quietly. Her smile faded almost instantly. With visible reluctance, she accepted the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside, copies of original land surveys, official legal notices about the dispute, and an exhaustive set of materials proving the extent of the encroachment, photographs, property measurements, historical documentation, and a sharply written brief outlining my legal claims, all compiled by David. I held my breath as she flipped through the pages. First came confusion, then disbelief, then the dawning horror of realization. She looked up at the man who'd handed her the envelope, said something I couldn't hear, then turned quickly, scanning the crowd like she was searching for someone to explain it all away. Guests nearby began murmuring. The mood shifted subtly at first, then unmistakably, concern replaced celebration. People were starting to sense something wasn't right. But then Cheryl did something unexpected. She looked across the lawn straight toward me. Our eyes locked for the first time in months. She knew. In that instant, she understood I had known all along. That I'd stood by, watched her pour millions into this project, and waited strategically, patiently for the perfect moment to strike. Her face was a storm of emotions: shock, anger, embarrassment, a broken bar, and the crushing weight of realization. We stared across the stretch of land, two opposites, me in my worn flannel shirt, her in a designer dress, separated by property lines and $6 million worth of legal trouble. What must have been going through her mind in that moment? The party wasn't over yet, but it was about to change forever. The event didn't come to a screeching halt, but the entire vibe shifted. Guests began whispering among themselves, exchanging glances as they tried to piece together what was unfolding. A few started slipping away quietly, making their way to their cars, clearly unsettled by the sudden shift in energy. The jazz band played on, but the music now felt strangely out of place, like a soundtrack to a wake. Cheryl spent the remainder of the evening glued to her phone, likely cycling through attorneys and trying to figure out what legal lifeline she could grab. I stayed on my porch, sipping the last of my beer, watching as lights flicked off inside the mansion one by one. Everything was about to change, not just for Hero but for both of us. What would Cheryl do now? Would she gear up for war, or cut her losses and retreat? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Within a short span of time, Cheryl had assembled an impressive legal team of specialists in construction law and land disputes. David Walsh warned me she wasn't backing down quietly. He was right. Her attorneys filed for an emergency hearing, challenging my ownership and proposing a compromise that would allow her to keep the house. Say what you will about Cheryl, she wasn't about to walk away from a $6 million investment without a battle. But a fight like that comes with built-in disadvantages, especially when you're going up against original survey maps, decades of recorded property lines, and clear visual proof of where those construction lines ended up. From the beginning, she was climbing uphill. When the court date came, I put on my best suit, something that at least made me look like I belonged in a room discussing multi-million-dollar estates. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread, and now curious locals and even a few reporters were packed into the gallery, calling it the property case of the decade. Cheryl arrived with her legal entourage and what looked like a stack of documents she hoped would shift the tide in her favor. She'd clearly spent a fortune preparing her defense, bringing in consultants and expert witnesses to dissect every angle: historic land records, boundary discrepancies, even current surveying standards. Her core argument was that she purchased the property in good faith, relying on official county documentation. She'd spent millions based on information she believed to be valid. Honestly, it wasn't a terrible defense. And for a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe the judge would buy it. Her legal team painted me as the antagonist, to someone who'd withheld critical information until the timing was just right to pounce. They claimed I had allowed her to make a massive financial mistake, all while secretly preparing to pull the rug out from under her. According to them, my silence wasn't just calculated, it was deceitful. But David Walsh was more than ready. He laid out our side with the cool confidence of someone who'd done this countless times. He started with the original maps from the early 80s, explaining how boundary markers had vanished or shifted over time, and how the county's modern records failed to reflect the real property lines. He showed photos tracking each phase of Cheryl's construction, complete with measurements, and backed it up with statements from neighbors who had watched the build unfold. Then came the moment that turned the room. Cheryl's lead attorney stood up, voice sharp with accusation. "Your Honor," he said, pointing my way, "Mr. Parker knew about this so-called boundary issue for months. He said nothing. He waited. This looks like a calculated effort to defraud my client. At the very least, it's bad faith." I could feel the tension rise as those words echoed through the courtroom, but David remained composed. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady and respectful, "my client had no legal duty to alert Miss Langford to her own failure to confirm her property boundaries. Land ownership is public record. She chose to proceed with construction without verifying those records. Mr. Parker acted properly by documenting the situation and using the legal system exactly as he should have. That is not fraud. That is restraint and respect for the law." Then the judge turned to me and asked the question I had been expecting. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" And I told the truth, as plainly as I could. "Your Honor," I said, "I became aware of the boundary issue after the building had already begun. At that point, I consulted legal counsel who advised me to thoroughly document everything and pursue a resolution through the courts. I never misled Miss Langford. I simply chose not to provide information that, frankly, she should have verified before investing millions." The judge gave a brief nod and scribbled something down. I hoped it was in my favor. The hearing dragged on for hours, each side laying out its evidence and presenting witness after witness. By the time we broke for lunch, I felt drained. The judge, however, remained unreadably stone-faced and steady. Then came the ruling. "Building on land one doesn't legally own," the judge said, "constitutes unlawful enrichment. The property and the structures built on it illegally revert to the rightful landowner." Just like that, Cheryl didn't just lose a home. She had unknowingly constructed one for me. But it didn't end there. She was ordered to pay additional penalties: $30,000 in land use fees, $60,000 for willful trespassing, and $120,000 to cover legal expenses. When the numbers were read aloud, her lawyer leaned over to whisper, and Cheryl visibly slumped in her seat. The clerk handed me the signed judgment. I didn't grin. I didn't gloat. I just gave a single nod like we'd just finalized a livestock deal. Still, the judge offered her a way out. Instead of forfeiting everything, she could purchase the portion of land her home encroached upon at full market value. That appraisal came in at $800,000. So to keep her $6 million villa, Cheryl would need to pay nearly $2 million in additional costs. Once the penalties and fees were added up, it was a lifeline but a costly one. When David explained it all to me afterward, I realized the judge had found a balance between legal precision and practical resolution. Cheryl could keep the house, but the price of her oversight was steep. "You think you've won?" she muttered bitterly on her way out. "I didn't win," I replied. "You forfeited." She ultimately paid. Losing the mansion would have been too much, even for her pride, but the financial toll was massive. She had to refinance assets, sell off other properties, and restructure her business just to cover the cost. The ripple effect was brutal. Her reputation took a hit in the real estate world, where errors like these are whispered behind closed doors but remembered forever. Clients backed away, deals fell through. Her image as a savvy, elite developer was tarnished beyond repair. Within months, she put the house on the market and sold it to a tech entrepreneur from California. Shortly after, she packed up and left the area for good. As for me, I used the compensation wisely. I expanded my ranch, upgraded equipment, and started a local fund to preserve the rural landscape that brought us all here in the first place. I also created a scholarship program for kids interested in agriculture and land conservation as something useful, something that would last. The whole experience taught me that quiet preparation can sometimes outmatch loud confrontation, that standing up for what's yours doesn't always require shouting. Sometimes it means waiting, gathering facts, and letting the truth do the talking. I don't feel triumphant looking back, just at peace. Cheryl walked away with a harsh, expensive reminder about due diligence and about the importance of respecting property lines, both legal and personal. I learned that sometimes, The most powerful stance is silence. Letting someone dig their own hole can be more effective than trying to stop them. I didn't tear down the house. I didn't even paint it. Every stone, every wall, remains exactly how she left Haida except for one thing, the custom brass plaque she'd had made with her initials on it. I melted that down. The mansion is still standing, now owned by a guy who uses it as a weekend escape. He's a good neighbor, asks permission before changing anything that might impact the rest of us. Treats the place like a home, not a trophy. Every now and then, I sit on my porch and look across the field at that house, the pool lights flickering against the water. And I wonder how different things might have been if Cheryl had just shown me an ounce of respect from the start. Then again, maybe things unfolded exactly the way they needed to. Because the best kind of justice, it's not loud, it's lasting. I folded up that old property map once everything was over. Not a single line needed correction. Never mistake silence for surrender. Sometimes people stay quiet just long enough for others to bury themselves. Ownership doesn't need to raise its voice yet, but when it finally speaks, it echoes. If you're still here, I'd love to know your thoughts. Have you ever watched justice move this slow but land this hard? Drop your take in the comments. I read every one. And if the story hit the mark and you'd like to support the channel, feel free to tap the thanks button below. Catch you next time. That's all for now from Ya Stories. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell on.